The first time humans started sharing apartments with alien exchange students, the news channels called it a step toward the future. Government said it would help both species learn to live together, hand in hand, like neighbors. But for most people, it was not about history or culture. It was about paying the rent on time. For Daniel, it was exactly that. The city was too expensive, the jobs too uncertain, and the bills too high. He needed someone to split the rent, and the university program was offering a discount if he agreed to live with one of the alien students. At first, he thought it would be too strange, but the numbers on the paper were louder than his doubts. He signed up. That was how Jirak became his roommate. Jirak was unlike anyone Daniel had ever met. He was tall, much taller than any human, with skin the color of deep ocean blue. His eyes were too large, bright like silver coins under the moon, and his long fingers always moved as if they were tracing invisible lines in the air. When he walked, he was careful, his steps measured, like someone carrying something fragile. At first, Daniel did not know how to act around him. They spoke little. Jirak studied human culture the way a student studies for an exam. He asked questions about words, about food, about clothing, about the strange noises people made when laughing at movies. Daniel usually answered with short replies, not because he disliked Jirak, but because he was unsure of what to say. The silence between them became normal. Their apartment was small, but enough for two. Daniel had his own room, and so did Jirak. The common space was shared, but most of the time each stayed behind their own door. It was easier that way. But sometimes Daniel found himself wondering, what did Jirak think when he watched him cook eggs in the morning? Did he find human life boring? Did he miss his home, his family, his planet? Daniel never asked. He kept his questions hidden, just like he kept most of his feelings. Until one evening. It was late, the sky outside painted in soft orange fading into night. Daniel had returned from work exhausted. He carried a small box from the back of his closet and placed it on the floor of his room. He had not opened that box in years. His fingers hesitated on the lid, but then he pulled it open. Inside were photographs. Old, worn, the edges bent. He picked one up slowly. It was a picture of his father. The man was smiling, holding him when he was just a boy. The sight of it hit him like a wave. His chest grew heavy, his throat tightened, and before he could stop himself, his eyes burned. A single tear slipped down, then another. He pressed the photo against his chest, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. He had promised himself not to do this, not to go back to this memory. Yet here he was, sitting on the floor, shaking silently as the past returned. Daniel thought he was alone. But the door opened without warning. Human? Jirak's voice was calm but surprised. Daniel looked up quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. His heart jumped. Embarrassment rushed in, faster than the tears. "Knock next time," he muttered, trying to sound normal, but his voice cracked. The photo box sat open beside him, the pictures clear in view. Jirak stepped inside slowly, his tall figure casting a shadow across the room. His silver eyes blinked, studying Daniel, then the photo in his hands. His head tilted slightly. A gesture Daniel had learned meant confusion or curiosity. "You are leaking," Jirak said softly, pointing at the tear Daniel had missed. "But you are not injured?" Daniel's cheeks burned hot. He turned his face away. "I'm fine. Don't worry about it." He shoved the photo back into the box quickly, as if hiding it could erase the moment. But Jirak did not leave. He stayed in the doorway, his long fingers twitching, his body strangely still. His voice dropped lower. "You weep for one who is gone?" Daniel froze. He had not expected him to understand. His chest tightened again, the words caught between denial and truth. For the first time in years, someone had seen his weakness. Someone had stepped into a place he had kept locked away, and he did not know what to do. Daniel sat frozen on the floor, the box of photographs open beside him, his father's picture still trembling in his hand. He wanted to shout, to tell Jirak, to leave, to slam the door and pretend nothing had happened. But his voice failed him. The tall alien did not move away. His silver eyes blinked slowly, his gaze fixed not with pity, but with an expression Daniel could not understand. Girac tilted his head, as if listening to something inside Daniel that no one else could hear. "You weep for one who is gone?" Girac asked again, his voice steady, low, almost careful. Daniel's throat tightened. He hated being seen like this. He hated feeling weak. All his life he had learned to bury pain, to smile when he had to lock away grief where no one could touch it. But now his secret was exposed, and it felt like standing naked in the middle of the street. "Yes," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes dropped to the floor, ashamed of the truth. Girac stepped closer, his movements slow, cautious, like someone approaching a wounded animal. His long arms folded across his chest, and he crouched low to meet Daniel's eye level. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, heavy and expectant. Daniel wiped at his face again, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a broken breath. "It's nothing, just old memories. You don't have to worry about it, really." But Girac didn't leave. He lowered his voice until it was almost a whisper. "On my world, when tears fall for the dead, it is never nothing. It is sacred." The words pierced Daniel like an arrow. Sacred. No one had ever called his grief that before. Humans called it sadness, loss, or pain. But sacred? That was different. That was weighty. That was holy. Daniel tried to look away, but Girac's steady gaze held him still. There was no judgment in those silver eyes, no discomfort, no awkwardness, just presence. Finally, Daniel muttered, "It was my dad. He died a long time ago. I don't talk about it." Girac blinked, his large eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. He did not say, "I'm sorry for your loss." He did not fill the silence with empty comfort. Instead, he lowered himself further, folding his legs under him until he sat cross-legged on the floor. His long spine straightened, his hands rested gently against his chest, and he bowed his head. Daniel stared at him confused. "What are you doing?" Girac's voice came soft, deep, almost like a chant. "This is the rite of stillness. On my world, when one carries grief, another sits beside them in silence. The weight is not carried alone." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever done this for him. Not his friends, not his family. People always tried to cheer him up, to distract him, to tell him life goes on. But no one had ever just sat. No one had treated his sorrow as something to share, not something to fix. The room felt different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, but strangely warm. Daniel's shoulders, always tense, began to relax. His eyes blurred again, tears rising uninvited. But this time he did not hide them. He let them fall. For a long time neither of them spoke. Only the quiet sound of Daniel's breathing and the faint hum of the city outside filled the space. Girac stayed completely still, his head bowed, his presence steady like a stone in the middle of a storm. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. His voice shook, but the words came out before he could stop them. "I was 16. One moment he was there, the next, gone. I never got to say goodbye." Girac lifted his head slowly, his eyes soft but sharp with understanding. He did not interrupt. He did not tell Daniel that time heals all wounds. He simply listened. Daniel's voice cracked again. "Sometimes I feel like I should have done more. I should have been better. Maybe then—" He stopped, choking on the words. But Girac placed one long hand over his chest and spoke quietly. "On my planet, we say, the dead live again when their story is told. Tonight your father lives through your voice." Daniel's tears came harder now, but they felt different. Not shameful, not lonely. They felt like release, like letting go of something heavy he had been carrying for years. For the first time in so long, Daniel realized he wasn't alone anymore. Daniel sat frozen, his eyes red and wet, his chest still trembling with the effort of holding back sobs. He had expected Jirak to stand up and leave, maybe even apologize for intruding, but instead the alien had done something so unexpected that Daniel did not know how to react. Jirak had lowered himself fully onto the floor, folding his long blue legs with difficulty. His spine was perfectly straight, his hands pressed against his chest, and his head bowed. The glow from his silver eyes dimmed slightly, as though he had pulled some part of himself inward. "This," Jirak whispered, his voice like a gentle echo, "is the rite of stillness." Daniel blinked at him, confused, the tear-stained photo still clutched in his hand. "The what?" Jirak did not lift his head. "On my world, when one grieves, another joins them. We do not speak. We do not try to fix what cannot be fixed. We sit. We give silence as a gift. The sorrow is shared, and the one who weeps does not carry the weight alone." Daniel's throat tightened. His instinct told him to laugh, to brush it off, to tell Jirak that humans didn't do things like that. But no laughter came. No excuses formed. Instead, something inside him softened and his shoulders slumped. The room fell quiet. Daniel's apartment had always been noisy in small ways. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzzing of the old ceiling fan, the distant honking from the street outside. Yet now, sitting across from Jirak, the silence felt deeper, fuller, almost alive. He stared at the alien, watching the way he remained perfectly still, his long hands unmoving, his chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. There was no pity in Jirak's posture, no awkward discomfort, only presence, only respect. Daniel's eyes began to burn again. He pressed his palms against his face, trying to hold himself together, but the tears broke free anyway. For so long he had cried alone, always in secret, always ashamed. But here, with Jirak bowing in silence, the tears felt different. They no longer felt like weakness. They felt aloud. Minutes passed, maybe more. Daniel lost track of time. He cried softly, then breathed, then simply sat, the box of old photos resting beside him, and Jirak stayed unmoving, a steady figure of quiet support. Finally, Daniel's voice broke the silence. It was small, shaky, but real. "He was my dad. He died when I was 16. Heart attack." One second he was laughing, the next, his words caught, his throat tightening. He forced himself to continue. The next second he was just gone. Jirak slowly lifted his head. His silver eyes met Daniel's, and for the first time Daniel saw no strangeness in them, only understanding. "Your heart aches because it remembers," Jirak said softly. "On my planet, grief is not weakness. It is proof that love was real." Daniel let out a shaky breath. He had heard many words before. Platitudes, advice, meaningless attempts to comfort. But this felt different. Jirak wasn't trying to erase the pain. He was naming it, honoring it. The tears started again, but Daniel did not fight them. He let the grief flow out, years of buried sorrow spilling into the quiet. His voice trembled. "Sometimes I feel like I failed him, like I should have done something. Maybe if I'd been better." But Jirak raised one long hand, not to silence him, but to guide his words away from that path. His voice was low, steady. "On my world, we do not speak of what we could not change. We speak of what was real." "Tell me, what was his laughter like?" The question hit Daniel like a spark. He blinked, surprised. "His laughter?" "Yes," Jirak said firmly. "You carry sorrow, but also memory. Share it. Let him live again in your voice." Daniel swallowed hard. His lips trembled, but slowly. Almost unwillingly, a small smile touched his face.
He had this loud laugh.
The kind that filled the whole room. You could hear it from outside. It embarrassed me when I was a kid, but now, I miss it more than anything. Jirak's silver eyes glowed faintly brighter, as though those words had meaning beyond what Daniel could understand. "Then tonight he is not gone. Tonight he lives here." Daniel's chest tightened, but not with the same crushing grief. This time it was something warmer, softer. He held the photo close and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." The alien bowed his head once more, his voice like a promise. "And thanks to you, human, for letting me share in his life." For the first time in years, Daniel did not feel completely alone. The night grew deeper, the city outside their window glowing faintly with neon lights. But inside Daniel's small room, time seemed to move differently. The box of old photos sat open between them, the pictures scattered like fragile pieces of a forgotten past. Daniel had never let anyone see them before. He had always thought of them as something private, something to protect. Yet here he was showing them, if not directly, then through the raw emotion that clung to every word. Girac did not move much. His tall frame remained steady, his silver eyes fixed on Daniel with patience that felt endless. His presence was strange yet comforting, as if he carried an invisible shield around them, a shield where grief was safe. Daniel wiped his face again, his voice unsteady. I haven't talked about this in years. People don't want to hear it. They say they're sorry and then change the subject. They tell you to move on. But how do you move on from something like this? Girac tilted his head, his long fingers tapping lightly against his chest. On my world, we do not move on, he said softly. We move with. The dead walk beside us, not behind. They are in every story, in every memory. To forget them would be the true loss. Daniel stared at him, his chest heavy with emotion. He had never heard grief described like that before. To move with instead of move on. The words settled into him like seeds planted in dry soil. He hesitated, then reached for another photograph from the box. His fingers shook as he held it up. This one was of him and his father fishing by a lake, both of them laughing, their clothes dirty, their smiles wide. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing, just stared at the frozen memory. My dad loved fishing, he finally whispered. He said it was never about catching anything. It was about being together, about the quiet. His voice cracked, but he pushed on. I used to think it was boring. I'd complain all the time. But now, he shook his head, tears forming again. Now I'd give anything to sit by that lake with him again, even if we caught nothing. Girac leaned slightly forward, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim room. Then you honor him by remembering. The lake, the laughter, the quiet. Each time you tell the story, the memory breathes again. Daniel closed his eyes, letting those words sink in. He realized something. He wasn't just remembering for himself anymore. He was telling the story to someone who actually wanted to hear it, someone who wasn't rushing to escape the sadness but instead choosing to stay in it with him. The wall he had built inside himself for years, the one that kept everyone out of his grief, began to crack, and for once Daniel didn't try to hold it together. He let the crack spread. He spoke again, more freely this time. After he died, I felt like I had to be strong for my mom. I didn't want her to see me cry, so I stopped. I buried everything. But it never really went away, it just sat inside me, heavy, waiting. He paused, his breathing shaky, and I hated it. I hated feeling weak. I hated remembering him because it hurt too much. Girac's voice came quiet but firm. Pain is not weakness. Pain is proof of love. Do not fear it. It shows your heart still remembers. Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. No one had ever said that to him before. To most people, pain was something to get rid of. But Girac was telling him it was something to hold with honor. For a long time, the two of them sat in silence again. But this silence was different from the heavy one that had filled the room before. This silence felt alive, warm, like a blanket wrapped around both of them. Daniel let out a slow breath. His shoulders felt lighter, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the crying. Maybe it was the talking, or maybe it was simply that someone had chosen to sit with him instead of turning away. When he finally spoke again, his voice was small but steady. Thank you for staying. Girac lifted his head slightly, his silver eyes glowing brighter for a moment. On my world, when one shares sorrow, they give trust. To walk away from that is dishonor. I will not leave until your heart is calm. Daniel felt something inside him shift, something deep and quiet. For the first time in years, he didn't feel ashamed of his grief. For the first time, he felt like maybe he could live with it instead of against it. He looked at Girac, really looked at him. Not just as an alien, not just as a roommate, but as someone who had crossed a wall no one else had dared to cross. And strangely, Daniel didn't feel afraid. For the first time, he felt understood. The night of the rite of stillness changed something between Daniel and Girac. Before that, they had lived like polite strangers, sharing space but not truly sharing life. Daniel would cook his meals, Girac would study his human history books, and they both stayed behind closed doors. But after that night, the air in the apartment felt different. It no longer carried the silence of two separate lives, but the quiet understanding of two people who had touched each other's hidden pain. Daniel noticed the difference first in small ways. Sometimes when he sat at the kitchen table staring at his coffee in the morning, Girac would appear silently, pour himself a glass of water and sit across from him. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat. Yet Daniel no longer felt uncomfortable with the silence. It was no longer empty. It was shared. Other times Girac would ask questions, his silver eyes curious but gentle. What is a father's role in your culture? Or why do humans keep pictures of those who are gone? Daniel found himself answering with more honesty than he expected. He would tell him stories, small pieces of his childhood, details he thought he had forgotten, and every time Girac listened with full attention, as if each word mattered more than anything else in the world. One evening after dinner, Girac asked softly, "Will you share a story of him?" Daniel paused, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. No one had ever asked him that before, not like this. He set the fork down slowly, his chest heavy but warm. "A story?" "Yes," Girac said, leaning forward. "On my world, when we grieve, we tell stories of the dead. Their laughter, their kindness, their mistakes. In this way, they are never gone. They travel with us in memory." Daniel looked down at his plate, struggling. It wasn't easy. Part of him wanted to hide again, to say no. But when he lifted his eyes and saw the calm patience in Girac's face, the words came out before he could stop them. "My dad, he used to sing when he cooked," Daniel said quietly. A small, reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Not good singing. His voice was terrible. He'd make up silly songs about the food like pancakes for the king of the kitchen. It drove me crazy when I was a teenager, but... His smile wavered, turning into a trembling breath. Now I'd give anything to hear him sing again. Girac's eyes glowed faintly, his voice deep with meaning. "Then he sings again tonight through you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Tears threatened again, but this time they came with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, talking about his father didn't feel like stabbing an old wound. It felt like lighting a candle in the dark. The more they spoke, the more Daniel realized he wasn't just healing himself. He was teaching Girac about humanity, not the surface things like food or clothing, but the deep things, the hidden things. Pain, memory, love, loss, things that tied all people together. In return, Girac began to share pieces of his own world. He told Daniel about his clan, about the way they gathered around great fires to sing the names of those who had passed. He explained that in his culture, grief was not private but communal. The whole clan carried it together, like lifting a heavy stone that no one could lift alone. One night, as they sat by the window looking out at the city lights, Girac spoke words that Daniel would never forget. "On my planet, when someone sits with you in sorrow, when they see the part of you most hidden and do not turn away, they are no longer stranger. They are kin. You are now my kin brother." Daniel froze, the weight of the words sinking in. Kin brother. The title sounded sacred, something far more than friendship. He didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened, his eyes stung, but all he could manage was a small nod. Inside, though, the words struck him deeply. For years he had carried his grief in silence, believing no one wanted to share it, believing he had to carry it alone. Now here was an alien, a being from another world, calling him brother. Daniel looked at Girac, and for the first time since his father's death, he felt something new bloom in his chest. Not just sadness, not just pain, but connection. A bond that stretched across worlds, built not on laughter or convenience, but on the simple act of sitting together in grief. And he realized something that night. Girac wasn't just his roommate anymore. He was family. The bond between Daniel and Girac grew quietly over the following weeks. What began as an awkward living arrangement had transformed into something far deeper. They still lived in the same small apartment, still paid rent and split chores, but the atmosphere had changed. There was no longer the weight of silence filled with distance. Now there was a silence filled with trust. Daniel began to open up more. Sometimes it was just small details, stories about his favorite childhood meals or jokes his dad used to tell. Other times it was heavier, memories he had locked away for years. Girac listened to all of it with the same patience, never judging, never interrupting. But grief was not something that left easily. It came and went like the tide, and one evening it came back harder than Daniel expected. It was a cold night, rain tapping against the apartment window. Daniel had returned from work drained, his head full of stress. Bills piled on the counter, emails unanswered, pressure building on all sides. He thought he could handle it. He thought he could keep it together. But then, out of nowhere, a memory of his father hit him like a punch to the chest. He remembered his dad's voice telling him, "You'll do great things, son." And suddenly, Daniel felt like he was failing that promise. His hands trembled as he sat on his bed, the old photo box open again. Tears welled up before he could stop them, spilling freely down his face. This time, he didn't hear the door open. When he looked up through blurred eyes, Chirac was already standing in the doorway. His tall blue figure was framed by the dim light of the hall, his silver eyes calm and steady. Daniel didn't hide this time. He didn't shove the photos back into the box. He didn't wipe his tears in shame. He let them fall. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I can't do this. I'm not strong enough." Chirac entered quietly, lowering himself to the floor as he had before. But tonight he did something more. From the small pouch he always carried on his belt, he pulled out an object wrapped in soft cloth. With great care he unfolded it and revealed a glowing shard, faintly blue as if lit from within. He placed it gently into Daniel's trembling hands. Daniel looked at it, startled. What is this?" Chirac's voice was low, almost reverent. "This is a shard of my home's moon. It is a piece of the sky I was born under. On my world, when one is far from their people, they hold this, and it reminds them they are never truly alone. Tonight I give it to you." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the glowing shard, its light warm against his palms. He could hardly comprehend the weight of the gift. This was no simple object. It was a piece of Chirac's world, something sacred, something irreplaceable. Why would you give this to me?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. Chirac's silver eyes met his, unwavering. "Because you carry sorrow as if it belongs only to you. But it does not. I am your kin brother now. Your grief is mine to carry also." Daniel's tears flowed harder. He clutched the shard to his chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. No human friend had ever stayed with him this way. No one had ever given so much simply to ease his pain. And yet, here was an alien, someone from another world, offering him the most precious reminder of home. For a long time, Daniel couldn't speak. He just cried, holding the shard, while Chirac sat beside him in silence. The same silence as before, steady, patient, full of meaning. At last, Daniel found his voice. It was small, fragile, but full of truth. "Thank you. I don't know how to deserve this." Chirac shook his head slowly. "It is not about deserving. It is about being. You grieve, therefore you are not alone. That is enough." Daniel closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the shard seep into him. For the first time, his grief did not feel like a chain pulling him down. It felt like something he could carry, not because it was lighter, but because someone was carrying it with him. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, Daniel realized something. Strength wasn't about hiding pain. It wasn't about burying it so no one could see. Strength was letting someone else see it and trusting they wouldn't walk away. And with Chirac beside him, he no longer felt weak. He felt human. Truly human. The days after that night felt different for Daniel. Something inside him had shifted. The shard of Chirac's moon stayed on his bedside table, glowing faintly in the dark, reminding him that he was no longer alone in his sorrow. Each time he touched it, he remembered Chirac's words. "Your grief is mine to carry also." Daniel began to notice the small ways Chirac cared for him. He didn't hover or smother, but he was present. Sometimes he brewed strange alien teas that smelled sharp but calmed Daniel's nerves. Sometimes he simply sat nearby while Daniel worked, saying nothing but making the room feel less heavy. And Daniel gave something in return. He started teaching Chirac about the human way of remembering those who are gone. Photos, stories, songs, even the act of cooking meals that reminded people of home. Chirac listened with interest, storing each detail as if it was sacred knowledge. One evening, a full month after the night of the shard, Daniel found himself laughing again. A real laugh, not the polite kind, not the fake one he used at work, but a deep laugh that surprised even him. Chirac had mispronounced a word while practicing English, and the way he repeated it with such seriousness made Daniel burst out. For a moment, the apartment was filled not with grief but with lightness. When the laughter died down, Daniel sat back and realized how far he had come. His grief was still there, it always would be, but it no longer ruled every corner of his life. He could breathe again. He could feel again. But the strangest moment of all came on a quiet Sunday morning. Daniel was in his room sorting through a pile of clothes and old books. The window was open, sunlight spilling across the floor. He had put on one of his father's old shirts, faded but soft, something he rarely wore because it reminded him too much of what he had lost. He didn't hear Zirak approach. The door creaked open, and the alien stepped inside without warning. For a split second, Daniel froze, his heart racing, embarrassed. He expected Zirak to apologize for intruding or perhaps look confused at the human relic spread across the bed. But instead, Zirak stopped in his tracks. His silver eyes focused on Daniel, and then, something Daniel had never seen before, Zirak placed one hand over his own chest, bowed his head slightly, and made a soft sound, almost like a hum. Daniel blinked. What are you doing?" Zirak's voice was steady but full of emotion. "On my world, when we see one wearing the memory of their ancestor, we honor them. You carry your father with you now. It is not shameful. It is sacred." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked down at the shirt, suddenly seeing it differently. He had always thought of wearing it as weakness, as holding on to something he should let go. But Zirak didn't see weakness. He saw respect. For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. His eyes burned, but this time his tears weren't heavy. They were light, filled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.